This week's episode of Becoming Elizabeth, Necessity Compels Me to Plague You, was jam-packed. Thomas Seymour stalks Elizabeth and manages to wheedle out of her an agreement to marriage. Lord Protector Somerset makes a secret deal behind the king's back. A rebellion breaks out. Thomas Seymour shoots the dog. Elizabeth has a night of celebration. Robert Dudley gets beaten up. And Elizabeth and Cat are arrested. Phew! But did all of this really happen in 1549? Join me, historian and author Claire Ridgway, as I look at the real history behind Becoming Elizabeth. So let's start with the main storyline, Thomas Seymour and Elizabeth. And I must give a trigger warning here, as this relationship constitutes grooming and sexual abuse. Last episode, we saw Elizabeth decide to leave the old her behind, a decision which was quickly followed by Seymour proposing to her, bringing back all the feelings she was trying to forget and to escape. Would the new Elizabeth be able to see Seymour for what he was, or would she fall under his spell again, was the question we were left with. The new Elizabeth was winning at the beginning of this episode. Thomas Seymour was stalking her, standing in her garden, watching her window for 3 nights, which is certainly not normal. And Elizabeth finally relents and lets him in. However, despite his romantic words about his soul having a compass that always comes back to her, she is strong, telling him, "I am not to blame for your thoughts of me." When he states that she was in love with him, Elizabeth reminds him that she was very young and very foolish. After telling her that she won't find another man like him because something like this only happens once, and reminding her of how often she changes her mind, Seymour leaves. Sadly, the new strong Elizabeth isn't able to hold out for long. When she bumps into Seymour at court, he persuades her to follow him. He tells her of how he's spent his whole life trying to be someone different, but that Elizabeth liked him just as he was. He manages to convince her that he truly loves her, and she agrees to marry him. He wants to get married straight away and secretly, but Elizabeth wants to do things properly and get the royal council's consent. After everything she's been through, with all the vicious gossip, she tells him, "I will not give up my victories to marry in the shadows." I'm still not happy with the way their relationship has played out in the series. To me, it still seems like an illicit romance, an affair, rather than grooming or sexual abuse. As one person said in a comment on my videos, the show gives the fictional Elizabeth far more agency than she had. And I'm left feeling that Seymour does love her. It's not purely about ambition and power. He likes the Thomas Seymour that Elizabeth loves. He feels he can be himself with her. It really is a romance, or that's how it comes across anyway. As David Starkey notes in his book on Elizabeth, a victim of abuse can fall in love with their abuser. But in this series, I just see 2 people in love. And with the age of the actors, it just seems very normal. I don't know, it just hasn't worked for me. But did Thomas Seymour propose to Elizabeth following Catherine's death? And what do we know about their relationship at this time? Well, we know that Seymour told William Sharrington that he would wear mourning black for 12 months, but after that, I know where to have a wife. So he had someone in mind, and that someone seems to have been Elizabeth, whose movements he was keeping an eye on, and whose servant Thomas Parry he questioned about Elizabeth's land and property holdings. When Elizabeth moved from Sir Anthony Denny's home to Hatfield, Thomas Seymour sent a servant to help her, and his nephew John Seymour told Cat Ashley that he'd been sent by Thomas to ask Elizabeth whether her great buttocks were grown any less or no. That makes me cringe. It's just horrible. However, historian Elizabeth Norton believes that Elizabeth was considering marriage to Seymour. and her servants, Cat Ashley and Thomas Parry, considered Seymour a good match for her. Later, though, Cat, Parry, and Elizabeth would claim that the marriage would only have been truly contemplated with the consent of the Royal Council. As Norton notes, though, Thomas Seymour had got away with a secret marriage before, and he was close to his nephew, the King. The one person in his way was his brother, the Lord Protector. When Thomas Parry saw Seymour in January 1549 and told him of how Cat would her grace were your wife of any man's living, Seymour replied, "Oh, it will not be. My brother will never agree unto it," and then muttered, "I am kept back or under." Seymour was coming undone. He was angry, and he didn't have the steadying influence of Catherine Parr anymore. By the way, Seymour did confide in Henry Grey about his feelings for his brother, the Lord Protector, and how he would help the king escape his control. The real Henry Grey must have been as shocked and bewildered by these words as the fictional one was. So what actually happened in January 1549? Well, on the 16th of January 1549, Seymour allegedly broke into the king's apartments at Hampton Court Palace, not Whitehall as depicted in the show, to kidnap the young king. As he entered the royal residence, it is said that he disturbed the king's beloved spaniel, who started barking at him. A panicked Seymour is said to have shot the dog, a noise which alerted one of the guards, who then apprehended Seymour. A contemporary source for this event is Francois van der Delft, the imperial ambassador, who reported it to the emperor on the 27th of January 1549, writing, "Sire, I have heard here that the Admiral of England, with the help of some people about the court, attempted to outrage the person of the young king by night, and has been taken to the Tower. The alarm was given by the gentleman who sleeps in the king's chamber, who, awakened by the barking of the dog that lies before the king's door, cried out, 'Help! Murder!' Everybody rushed in, but the only thing they found was the lifeless corpse of the dog. Suspicion points to the Admiral because he had scattered the watch that night on several errands, and because it has been noticed that he has some secret plot on hand, hoping to marry the second daughter of the late king, the Lady Elizabeth, who is also under grave suspicion. On my arrival in England, however, I will write the truth more fully to your Majesty, having nothing now to go upon beyond the information given by those who repeat common report." So the ambassador does admit that he's going on common gossip there. And on the 15th of February 1549, John Bircher in Strasbourg wrote to Henry Bullinger, telling him that Seymour had attempted by an unheard of treachery and cruelty to destroy with his own impious hands, in the deep silence of the night, our innocent king. Birch related how Seymour had obtained a key to the royal bedchamber from one of the king's chamberlains, but that things went wrong when he attempted to get to the king, because Edward's dog, which was just outside the king's chamber, betrayed the murderer by his barking. Birch went on to explain that Seymour killed the dog and was just about to kill the king when he was found by one of the king's guards. Seymour explained that he was simply checking that Edward was properly guarded, but his explanation fell on deaf ears and he was apprehended. Seymour was taken to the Tower of London, and Cat Ashley and Thomas Parry were also detained and taken to the Tower for interrogation. Elizabeth, however, was not arrested. Regarding Sir Anthony Denny going to Elizabeth to warn her what was going on, historian David Starkey does credit Sir Anthony Denny with being the most likely source of the advice to insist under interrogation that she and her servants had been prepared to entertain Seymour's advances only subject to the agreement of the council. Advice that Starkey believes saved Elizabeth. Oh, and the idea that Robert Dudley tried to stop Seymour and got beaten up for his efforts is fictional. Moving on to other storylines. We briefly saw Kett's rebellion in Norfolk in this episode, and that rebellion is historical. However, it didn't break out until July 1549, 6 months after Thomas Seymour's arrest. It was sparked off by local landowners in Norfolk illegally enclosing common land. But the grievances of the rebels, led by farmer Robert Kett, included complaints about bad local government and religious legislation. I'm assuming we'll see more of this rebellion next week. In this week's episode, we saw Edward Seymour, Lord Protector, making a secret deal with France, giving them back Boulogne in return for a French withdrawal from Scotland. But is this true? No, it isn't. Boulogne wasn't returned to France until 1550, after Somerset's fall. In reality, Somerset threatened to give Boulogne to Emperor Charles V after France angered him by attacking it, and it did come under a French siege during his time in power, but there was no secret dealing over it behind the king's back. I'm assuming that the real factors that led to Somerset's fall are just too time-consuming for the series to go into. I did miss Mary this episode. We only had that brief scene with her. But I did enjoy the scene with John Dudley and his sons Robert and Guildford, and his sage advice to them about not letting people know what they think. Definitely something to bear in mind at the Tudor court. Now, I haven't covered absolutely everything in this video, but I hope that I've helped uncover some of the history behind the series. Do see my video on Becoming Elizabeth books, reads that will help you separate fact from fiction. Well, that's all for now, so I will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.